So Tyler's asked me to talk about leadership, which is an interesting topic because I don't actually see myself as a leader. So how can I talk about something that I don't actually personally see myself as being? I see myself more as an enabler. I see myself as being an individual that helps bring out leadership qualities in other people. And actually, when I started to dig into this subject, I realized that one of the qualities of being a leader is raising other leaders. And so apparently I am a leader in that sense of the word. And so what I wanted to do is I want to talk very specifically about 3 things that God has shown me recently about leadership. And I want to try and take you through it in a very practical way. I want you to hopefully go away from this session with things that you can apply to your daily life so you can take more leadership. You can take more control of the situations that you're in. And this could be in any part of your life. It could be your professional life, it could be your personal life, it could be in your home life. It doesn't really matter. These leadership skills transcend across all types of environments. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I think, lesson number 1 about leadership. First lesson about leadership is that leadership is about influence. Okay? Nothing more or nothing less. Leadership is all about influence. And that was a very famous quote by a guy called John Maxwell, who's a pastor, very prominent in the US. And he actually wrote a sort of a Bible that was commented on all the sort of the key skills and gifts and teachings that Jesus talks about in the Bible. It's called the Leadership Bible. I strongly recommend you should go and get it. And he talks about leadership as being about influence. So influence in the sense that it can either be positive or negative. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be positive. Notable examples of negative leadership, I guess the most famous one is Hitler. You know, Hitler was a pretty prominent, pretty impressive leader. He was very inspiring. He was very persuasive. People forget that he was actually elected, right? So, so clearly he had certain leadership qualities that came through, but he had negative influence on his followers, negative influence. Then we can talk about some positive examples. So positive leadership. Jesus is a fantastic example, right? Jesus said to the guys, I don't know if you remember this story in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. And he said to the guys when they were out in the boat, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." And immediately, it says in the Bible, the next verse says, immediately they stopped, they dropped their nets, and they followed him. Now, does anyone sort of hasten to guess as to why that happened? Why do you think those men were moved on so few words to stop what they were doing and to follow him? Does anyone want to try and suggest? Sorry, yes. Was that someone?
Because Jesus did for them more than they could have done for themselves.
But they didn't know about Jesus at the time. So Jesus was still trying.
Jesus had said to them, "Follow me," but they knew him. But they had caught nothing all night. But when he told them to go the same place that they'd been all night and said, "Cast your net on the other side," they caught more than they had caught in all their lives. So it was a reason, a very good reason,
Yeah.
to become fishers of men.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a very good point. You're absolutely right. So you're talking about the context, the broader context being that just before he said this, there was a miracle that took place on the sea when they were going out into the sea and they were trying to catch fish. They couldn't catch fish. Jesus went out with them and they were able to catch a lot of fish. But actually what I'm trying to do is focus on this particular verse. And what I find quite interesting about this particular verse where it says, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men," is that Jesus saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves, right? So before they encountered Jesus, they were simply fishermen, right? They didn't understand human beings. They understood boats and seas and oceans. And they understood, swimming fishes. And they understood how to catch them in good times and in bad times, in the winter, in the summer, in the spring. But Jesus looked at them and said, actually, you know what? You're not just a fisherman. You're also a fisher of men. You can win souls. You can persuade people. You can build people up. You can help people. That's what he saw. And they were inspired by that. They were inspired by that. They were moved to be with him. They were moved to stop what they were doing because something was compelled within them to realize that actually that was their true calling. Their true calling was to be Jesus' disciple. It wasn't simply to be a fisherman. Okay? That was sort of my take on it. But I think it's an important principle, the principle of winning hearts and minds, the principle of persuasion. True leaders don't need titles. True leaders don't need positions. True leaders don't need hierarchy. True leaders don't need status in order to be somebody that other people look to and admire and want to follow, right? There's a verse by a guy called Brian Tracy, quote by Brian Tracy. Brian Tracy is a famous rugby player, but now he's a self-development coach. And he says, become the kind of leader that people would follow voluntarily, even if you had no title or position. So the question I want to ask you guys is, what type of leader would you follow? I suspect you're not going to mention David Cameron or Ed Miliband or Harriet Harman or Nick Clegg, because those are leaders that are not inspiring to you. But I would hope that you'd want to mention Jesus Christ. I would hope that you'd want to mention the disciples. I'd hope you'd want to mention God. I would hope that when you look at those people's lives, when you look at Jesus' life, when you look at the disciples' life, when you look at Paul's life, that is something that you wish to aspire to. That is something that you wish to follow, because it's those characteristics and those qualities that you want to emulate. That is what I hope for you. That is what I pray is what you're looking to. That is your example. What type of leader do you want to follow? So I think that's the first point I want to talk about leadership. The second point about leadership is the principle of manifestation. Now, one of the hardest things about being a leader is converting vision into reality. We all have fantastic ideas, right? I'm a huge, huge dreamer. I love thinking about massive, big ideas, changing the world, and talking about it on TED, and being in the spotlight, and I love it. It's fantastic. I want to do great things. I want to feed the hungry. I want to shelter the homeless. I want to share the wealth around. Right? That's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. But that is simply vision. That is vision, and visions are great. Visions are great. Ideas are great. But if ideas don't turn into reality, if visions are not birthed on earth, they are pointless, right? You can talk and you can talk and you can talk. And God forbid you would die and those visions are never ever realized. And actually, it wouldn't just be a travesty to yourself, it'd be a travesty to all those people that you could have helped, right? And so leadership is about manifestation. It's about bringing those things, those visions, those ideas that God gives you to change the world, to be different, to be the salt and the light of this world, and make it a reality, because that is what people are crying out for. They don't have the answers, right? They're looking to politicians, they're looking to cults, they're looking to signs and wonders from elsewhere, but they don't have the answers. People are crying out for answers to the biggest problems that are facing this society. And guess what? You have those answers. But to turn those ideas into reality requires certain qualities that are not easily to obtain. So for example, discipline. Do you have the discipline to wake up in the morning at 9 a.m.? Well, not 9 a.m., let's say 6 a.m. 9 a.m. is pretty... 9 a.m. is sort of my time right now. Do you have the discipline to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning every day, pray to God, start the day right, eat right, train right, so that when you're in the office at 8:30 a.m., you're raring to go. You don't miss a beat because you're ready. Do you have that discipline? Do you have that discipline to honour your word? When you say something, does it happen? Is your word as good as gold? Is your yes, yes, and is your no, no? Or do you break promises like it's going out of fashion? Do you persist? Because you know what, the reality about leadership and the reality about life and solving difficult problems is there's no way you're going to get it right the very, very first time. You are going to face obstacles. You are going to face challenges. That's why leaders are different. That's why leaders stand out, because they don't just simply say, stop, I'm not going to do this, it's too difficult, I'm going to turn around. What they say is, actually, I'm going to try harder. What they say is, can I approach this problem in a slightly different way? What they say is, you know what, I'm going to dust myself down and I'm going to try again tomorrow. That is what leaders do. Leaders persist. They break barriers. They change things. That is what leaders do. The principle of manifestation. John Maxwell says, the pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist, the idealist, the dreamer, expects it to change. The leader adjusts the sails. Do you adjust the sails, or do you just expect your life to change? Do you expect your circumstances to change? Do you expect the world to change? Do you expect, you know what, this is unfair, this is not right. I can't believe the world is going in this direction, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Someone has to rise up, but I'm not going to do anything about it. It's not right that Christians are not wealthy, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Be the change that you want to see in this world. There is nothing stopping you from doing that. Be the change that you want to see. You are well within your capability. You have gifts and talents that either you've already sort of emerged and shown themselves to you, or they will come about over a period of time. Develop those skills, develop those talents. Use them for God's kingdom. There's a verse that I want to talk about in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 3. Where it says, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. And I love that word, established. Not only will your plans come into being, but they will be established. In other words, they will be permanent, right? They will exist for a period of time. Your plans will be established, but first, commit your work to the Lord. Commit your work to the Lord and your plans, your visions, your dreams, they will be established. That is what the word says. The final principle I want to talk about is the principle of raising leaders. Your success and your failure as a leader is ultimately determined by your successor. And leaders often forget that. Leaders often believe that it's all about them. And actually, if they leave the ship, if they leave the organization, if they give up on the dream after a period of time because they want to do something else, it doesn't really matter what happens after them. But actually, that's a lie. That's not true. True leadership is about leaving a lasting legacy. That is what true leadership is all about. Let's look at Jesus Christ as our example. What did Jesus do? What steps did he take to ensure that when he left to be with God, when he died and rose on the third day to be with God, that a legacy was left in his place? He established a team. That team is what we call the disciples. And those disciples were sent out via the Great Commission to go and spread the gospel, 2 by 2, baptizing people in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Jesus taught them everything that he knew, everything. And he made sure that coming towards his final hours, that they understood who he was, because that was so critical. There's a verse, it's the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 16 to 17. And this is an encounter where Jesus is speaking to Peter. Well, actually, Jesus is speaking to all of the disciples. And the question that he asks is, you think it's quite a straightforward one. And the question that he asks is, who do people say that I am? That was the question that he was asking to the disciples. Right? Simple question. And they came back with responses. Some people say that you're you're this prophet, or you're this great king, or you're this person, or you're John the Baptist, or etc., etc., etc. And then Jesus answers the question again, but slightly changes the language. He says, but who do you say that I am? Referring specifically to the disciples. Now, remember the context here, right? The disciples were his family. They had spent time with him over a period of time during his ministry as he was spreading the gospel. They knew him better than anybody else. And so he turned to them and he said, who do you say that I am? And there was a deathly silence. Absolute deathly silence, and nobody uttered a word. Until Peter said, thou art the Christ. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Only Peter, out of the 12, knew who Jesus Christ truly was. Only he knew who Jesus Christ truly was. And off the back of that, Jesus said to him, and I also say to you, Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. What was he doing? He was leaving a legacy, and he was putting Peter at the head of that legacy. He was saying that Peter was the rock, the foundation block on which the church would be built. Why? Because Peter understood who Jesus was. And in order to preserve Jesus' legacy, Jesus needed to have someone who understood who he was at the helm to take the church forward. Think about your life. Areas when you demonstrate leadership. Are you raising leaders behind you? Think about your home life. Maybe you're a mother or you're a father. Look at your kids. Are your kids emulating the best of you or the worst of you? When you're around them, are you swearing all the time? Are you being slothful? Are you being rude? Are you are you demotivated? Are you uninterested in them? Are you setting the right example? Will they grow up to be like you? The best of you that you want to be? That's your home life. Let's say your professional life. In your professional life, let's say you're in a senior position and you're mentoring people, or let's say you're responsible for a team. How do you lead that team? Do you lead them by example, or do you bark orders because of your seniority and your title? Does that team respect you? Does that team want to work with you? Does that team come into work excited because you lead them in the right way, or don't they? There are different aspects of this that I'm talking about today that you can apply to your own life. Leadership is so important because leadership is first and foremost about influence, influencing people, winning hearts and minds, not through arguments and persuasion and through commands and through diktats. It's about moving people in such a way as though they want to be with you. They want to follow you because they believe in what you stand for. What do you stand for? Do you stand for something that people want to follow? Do you stand for something that you're proud that you stand for? So those are sort of my thoughts. I hope that was helpful. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.